Honestly, being accused of something I didn't do is my biggest fear in the world. I can't imagine what these teens felt. These are the top 10 innocent teenagers locked up for life. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell for more crime time in the future. Anyways, let's get wrongfully convicted. At number 10, Kevin Strickland. April 25th, 1978. Kansas City, Missouri. A group of 4 friends were hanging out in one of their houses when all of a sudden, crash! A group of assailants begin ransacking the house. All of the friends were tied up and shot, resulting in the passing of 3 of them. One woman, Cynthia Douglas, was shot in her leg and pretended to be gone from this world until the assailants left. Then, she crawled out of the house. Strickland was at home, watching television. 2 suspects, Kilm Adkins and Vincent Bell, were later arrested. Bell was a childhood friend of Strickland's and lived at a house nearby. Police found a fingerprint belonging to Strickland on Bell's car. Strickland says that this was because he had driven the car before, but the last time he had seen Adkins and Bell was at 5 or 6 p.m. on the night of the executions. Later, when police arrested Strickland, Douglas picked him out of a police lineup. Douglas later said that she was pressured into naming him as one of the perpetrators by detectives on the case, and until her passing in 2015, attempted to have her testimony recanted. In 2009, she emailed the Midwest Innocence Project, saying, "I'm seeking info on how to help someone that was wrongfully accused. I was the only eyewitness and things were not clear back then, but now I know more and would like to help this person if I can." Douglas said police told her, "Just pick Strickland out of the lineup and we'll be done. It will all go away. You can go on and you don't have to worry about these guys no more." Atkins and Bell confessed to the executions, but said Strickland was not a participant. Strickland was in prison for 42 years. He was 18 years old when arrested and 60 when he was exonerated. At number 9, the Beatrice Six. A dark February 5th night in 1985, time unknown. A 68-year-old woman was found executed in her apartment in Beatrice, Nebraska. The Beatrice Police Department opened an investigation, but no arrests were made. There were possible suspects, but blood tests failed to link them to the crime. Among those eliminated was Bruce Allen Smith, who was located in Oklahoma City. There, Oklahoma City Police Laboratory technician Joyce Gilchrist, later fired for her involvement in years of forensic fraud, tested Smith's biological sample and eliminated him as a suspect. Not long after, Burdett Searcy, a former investigator for the Beatrice Police Department who was working as a farmer, began his own independent investigation. He interviewed a number of formal confidential informants who assisted him in identifying several people who frequented the area of Wilson's apartment: Joseph White, Thomas Winslow, Ada Joanne Taylor, Cliff Sheldon, Mark Goodson, Beth Johnson, Deborah Sheldon, and Charlotte Bishop. 6 individuals, 4 from the list, gave their own version of how it went down, one of them only being able to vaguely remember anything, saying he has no memory of the crime but has seen it in a dream. White was sentenced to life in prison. Winslow was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Taylor was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Sheldon received 10-year prison terms. These 4, along with 2 others, were sent to prison, but eventually, after serving 18 years as a group, they were all exonerated. At number 8, Valentino Dixon. At about 1 a.m. on August 10th, 1991, nearly 100 people were hanging out at the intersection of East Delavan and Bailey Avenues near Louis' Texas Red Hots in Buffalo, New York, when a fistfight broke out. 2 brothers, 17-year-old Toriano Jackson and 20-year-old Aaron Jackson, were atop 19-year-old Mario Jarman when someone yelled, "Watch out, he's got a gun!" As people scattered, more than 24 gunshots rang out. When the shooting stopped and people began to return to the intersection, Toriano Jackson was deceased. Aaron Jackson and Jarman were wounded. A bystander, 17-year-old John Sullivan, suffered a graze wound on his leg. Police interviewed Mario Jarman at the hospital. He said Toriano Jackson shot him. 2 other witnesses, including Dixon's half-brother, Leonard Brown, said the gunman was 19-year-old Lamar Scott. 3 days later, a Buffalo television station reported that someone else had confessed on videotape to being the gunman. The station did not identify him, but police quickly learned that the man was Scott. At the time, police believed that Dixon was a substance seller and that Scott worked as his bodyguard. Detectives interviewed Scott, who had said he had shot the Jackson brothers after they began shooting at his friend Jarman. Scott offered to take a polygraph test. That offer was rejected and police discounted Scott's confession. Witnesses described the gunman as 6 feet tall and more than 170 pounds. Some said the gunman was heavy-set. Scott was just over 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds. Dixon was 5 feet 7 inches tall and about 130 pounds. On June 12, 1992, the jury convicted Dixon of second-degree execution, attempted execution, harm, and criminal possession of a weapon. He was sentenced to 38 1/3 years to life in prison. Dixon was released from prison 21 years later after his incarceration in 1991. At number 7, we have Walter McMillian. In 1986, an 18-year-old white woman by the name of Rhonda Morrison was executed in downtown Monroeville, Alabama, and police couldn't solve the crime. After 6 months with no leads or suspects, they turned their attention to McMillian, who was an unlikely suspect with no prior criminal history. A white man who was accused of crimes in another country was pressured by police to make false statements about McMillian, accusing him of taking the life of Miss Morrison. Walter was arrested by Monroe County Sheriff Tom Tate, who arranged for Walter to be placed on deceased row before the trial when he wasn't even convicted of any crimes. McMillian spent a horrifying 15 months on Alabama's deceased row before his trial. Walter McMillian was 11 miles away from the scene of the crime when it occurred, which dozens of black people testified, but the nearly all-white jury sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The judge overrode the sentencing and actually sentenced him to execution by electric chair. McMillian spent 6 more years on deceased row before he was released in March of 1993, making him among the first exonerees from deceased row. At number 6, the Baltimore Three. In the hallway of his Baltimore Middle School one afternoon in November 1983, DeWitt Duckett, 14, was shot and executed for his Georgetown University jacket. The attack was shocking, the first execution in a Baltimore City school, and the pressure to solve the case was intense. Early on Thanksgiving Day that year, police arrested 3 teenagers who were eventually convicted of execution and sentenced to life in prison. On Monday, 36 years after they were incarcerated, Baltimore Circuit Court Judge Charles J. Peters declared them innocent. On behalf of the criminal justice system, and I'm sure this means very little to you, I'm going to apologize, Peters told them. We're adjourned. The packed courtroom erupted in applause and family members began crying and hugging. At number 5, Dante Sharp. At about 9:15 p.m. on February 11th, 1994, 33-year-old George Radcliffe was found shot to execution in his Mazda pickup truck near the intersection of Shepherd and West 6th Streets in Greenville, North Carolina. The neighborhood was predominantly African American with a reputation for substance activity. Radcliffe was white, and police believed the shooting was likely related to a substance transaction gone bad. There was no forensic evidence tying Sharp to the crime scene. The police department's fingerprint technician had waited at least 3 days to process Radcliffe's truck, and because of that delay, only 2 prints suitable for comparison were found. The technician reported that neither Sharp nor Radcliffe was the source of either of those prints. Sharp was 44 years old when he was released. During the 24 years he was in prison, he had rejected several plea offers that would have given him a lesser sentence. He told the Associated Press, "My mama always told me that if you didn't do something, don't own up to it. Don't say you did." He said his faith provided the positivity to help me when I was around all that negativity. On November 12, 2021, Governor Roy Cooper granted Sharp a pardon of innocence, making him eligible to receive state compensation for his wrongful conviction. Number 4, Reginald Hayes. Hayes had spent nearly half of his life in prison for an execution he did not commit by the time he was freed from custody in 1998. Clark County prosecutors have never accused Hayes, born Reginald Mason, of any involvement in the 1985 execution that landed him in prison for 13 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Instead, they argued that the 14-year-old middle school student with no criminal record was guilty under Nevada's felony execution law because he was present at the time of the victim's kidnapping, which led to the slaying. It was a tragedy that he was even convicted, let alone in prison for all these years. Then, Las Vegas Police Undersheriff Richard Wingate wrote in a letter of support to the judge who ultimately granted Hayes freedom after years of appeals. A year after his release, the State Board of Pardons unanimously pardoned Hayes based on his innocence, but more than 2 decades would pass before the Las Vegas man was granted the highest form of criminal record expungement, a certificate of innocence awarded by the state along with $975,000 in compensation. Number 3, a teen from Toronto. The family of a black teenager from Toronto is looking for answers from Peel Regional Police after officers mistakenly arrested the 17-year-old while on the hunt for an execution suspect near Don Mills Road and Finch Avenue. Global News is not identifying the victim in the incident under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. It's horrible. No kid should have to go through this, said the teen's godfather, David Bosveld. It's a completely gut-punching feeling. This is a case of racial profiling, and this is a case of shoddy police work. Bosveld said officers in unmarked vehicles from Peel Regional Police and Toronto Police Services boxed in the teen's vehicle, smashed at least one window, fired flash bombs into the car, and then dragged the youth out of the car before handcuffing him. The teenager's family has now started a GoFundMe page to try and raise money to hire counsel in hopes of taking legal action against police. Number 2, David Milgard. In 1969, the Winnipeg man was 16 years old and passing through Saskatchewan with friends when Saskatoon nurse Gail Miller's body was found in a snowbank. A year after Miller was executed, Milgard was convicted of her execution and incarcerated from the ages of 16 to 39. Lawyers have accused police of having the worst kind of tunnel vision. During the investigation of the case, his mother Joyce, who passed away in 2020, never doubted her son's innocence, and together they spent more than 20 years fighting to prove his innocence. Milgard believed he would have been left to rot in prison and always credited her for helping secure his freedom. He was released from prison in 1992, but it took several more years before he was exonerated. In 1997, the emergence of new DNA evidence linked notorious criminal Larry Fisher to the execution. Fisher was convicted of the crime 8 years later and sentenced to life in prison. He passed away in 2015 at the age of 65. Milgard received a multi-million-dollar compensation package from the federal government in 1999. At number 1, Anthony Harris. Harris, who was convicted of executing his neighbor in 1999 at the age of 13, but had that conviction overturned in appeal, was a kind, hard-working student who could never be involved in an execution. Harris's 6th grade teacher told ABC News. Jenny Arbogast, for the first time since Harris's ordeal. She said she has feelings of regret over her community's response to her former student's arrest and wrongful conviction. Devon's body was found in a wooded area behind her home in New Philadelphia, Ohio in 1998, and the police arrested and charged Harris with her execution. In 2000, an appeals court ruled that Harris's taped confession, which was the key piece of evidence used to prosecute him, was coerced, and he was released from custody. I was picturing my student sitting in that conference or standing at my desk doing his best to answer the questions the way he would think I wanted him to answer them, she said. Those were the top 10 innocent teenagers who were locked away for life. If you like this video, make sure you show us you do, and we'll see you next time.